It'll be difficult for people to prove intellectual inferiority. That's why even in our textbooks in school, they don't like to teach our children about black inventions. Because even greater than our African history are our American inventions. Because from nowhere, you're coming up with things that revolutionize the American social and economic order.
Well, basically, there is a proverb that says that the only thing that peoples of European descent ever created was the patent office, because they stole everybody else's ideas and put their name on it.
During slavery, because you were the property of your master, a lot of what we invented was automatically given credit to the master. The credit was forwarded to the master because we was property. We weren't allowed to take fame or notoriety for the things we created.
Anything that made work easier. Why would white people want to invent something that make work easier when they had black folks to do it?
You have a huge incentive to try to get things to move smoothly so that, you don't get any more lashes, or somebody doesn't now have to sell someone else in your family. There was a lot of incentive to create inventions.
And that's another thing. Most of our black inventors had to deal with idea theft. White folks would come in and say, we did it first because we didn't necessarily know the process or have the money to patent our inventions. So white folk will find out what a black person invented and go do it real fast and get their application in, because back then the process wasn't as thorough as it is now. Whoever got their application in first to the patent office, that's who got the patent. So we got thousands of inventions by black people. We'll never even know it because of the fact that they were stolen.
They don't want anyone to know that we invented things. If it wasn't for black people, white people couldn't take a dump. A black man invented the toilet, and he just made it white on purpose.
A slave by the name of Black Sam, Eli Whitney's slave, created the idea for the cotton gin, and his master took it and patented in his own name. How could he do that with no benefit of books? He wasn't even allowed to learn.
A lot of people assume just because African slaves were illiterate, they were ignorant. And there's a real big difference, because African people, they had a very elaborate language or elaborate languages over in Africa. When Africans were brought over here, they were taught a bastardized version of English, and they weren't even allowed to see the language written down. And they were taught the language by lower class Europeans who were living in the South. So even though there was that major obstacle, blacks still did phenomenal things. Thomas Edison was known for stealing people's inventions. He was known for taking the inventions of a few African-American inventors. Lewis Latimer, Granville T. Woods actually went to court with Thomas Edison, and Granville T. Woods actually won his case.
Thomas Edison tried to bring Granville T. Woods to court on that invention. And I just saw a commercial for Mazda, I believe, cars, where they said, here's a man holding 1,000 patents. Well, 90% of them he stole.
Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison, who are probably considered America's two greatest inventors of all time. But guess who was designing their blueprints for the patent application? A black man. Now let's think about this for a minute. If you invent something, why do you need me to do the blueprints for the patent application? If it's your idea, how in the hell can I do the blueprints for it? You can't do the blueprints for my idea. I have to do them. So if Latimer is doing the blueprints, if he is your chief draftsman and he's doing your blueprints for your patent application, Alexander Graham Bell, did you invent the telephone, or did Lewis Latimer invent the telephone?
Thomas Edison had a whole troop of people that was in his sweatshop, and depending on the invention, he would hand it over to that particular department and tell them, see what it is that does, and then do something a little different, and we'll patent that. And when he took Granville T. Woods' information and tried to make it his own, the court said no.
The watermelon and black people stereotype, that came and that was popularized by Thomas Edison. Around 1890, Thomas Edison put together this Nickelodeon reel. There were these African-American men who were joking around, shucking and jiving, and kind of mugging for the camera, and they were eating watermelon. And Edison filmed this, put this out, and the general public saw this, and they said, okay, African-American people must really love watermelon. And right after that film came out, thousands of postcards and all types of memorabilia flooded the market of African-American people eating watermelon. So that watermelon stereotype was popularized by Thomas Edison.
A lot of people don't know there's an African-American male who is significant, has patents on the first major computer chips that made computers operate.
Other inventors that we don't know about essentially, who they call the father of the internet, was Philip Emeagwali, a Nigerian man who essentially created the connection for quantum bits of information so that multiple computers could actually communicate with one another.
During slavery, and this is well documented by white people, many of the masters, when they were sick, did not call for the physician. They called for the big mama on the plantation, and she would come with her medicine bag that didn't have alcohol and rum. It had all types of things that she made from the herbs that she had planted. Some of them said, I don't want the doctor. Bring me the witch doctor, that voodoo woman who I own.
Africans took what they brought from Africa, which would be a ground hockey, and all they did apply the game to ice.
When the British were fighting the United States, there were African slaves or former slaves assisting the British in fighting the U.S. When the U.S. won and the Britons lost, many of the African Americans were sent to British colonies in West Africa, and many of the African Americans were sent into Nova Scotia, Canada. And they formed what we now know as hockey. They started to play this new game called hockey, which was something that Africans were doing in Africa. In ancient Kemet, there was a form of field hockey that they were playing. And they went into Canada and they created what we now know as hockey. And there were actually black Canadian hockey teams in the early sport of hockey that a lot of people don't know about. And there's a great book about that called Black Ice that talks about the early inventors of hockey who were men of African descent.
The baddest cowboy, black or white. This man was so bad that they called him the Invincible One. Just to say that there was nobody badder than this man in the West, and that's been co-signed. The brother's name was Bass Reeves. Now, Bass Reeves was a former slave who pretty much beat up on his master to get away.
When we think of runaway African slaves, we always think of the Africans sneaking away in the middle of the night, hiding, ducking and dodging behind trees, hiding in bushes, hiding in rivers. Bass Reeves decided he was not going to be a slave anymore, and not only was he not going to be a slave, he told his master, I'm going to beat you up before I leave. So he beat up his master, escaped and got away and went into Oklahoma, which was like an outlaw territory. So he actually got away and became very prominent in the Old West.
When they began to open up the Oklahoma territory, they needed to recruit people. And they recruited him because he knew the Creek language, he knew the Muskogee, he knew how to speak the Seminole language. He knew all of the natives of the area, and he sat with them to learn about their traditions. The real life of this black man, Bass Reeves, became the mythic legends of Hollywood white cowboys. He brought in 3,000, count them, 3,000 bad guys. I'm talking about the worst murderers. He got 3,000 of them, killed 14. All of who the Lone Ranger became when you saw him on TV was actually the life of Bass Reeves.
African people, in many ways, the Underground Railroad established African people moving west and establishing places to be able to protect them. And so in the study and the research of the Underground Railroad, you will find that there are African-American communities that were established and have been there from before people can actually talk about it historically.